can make a way. Hey, hey, so humble yourselves and pray and guard His Torah. Obey each day. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Hoshiana, Hoshiana. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
And Moshe said, Hear, O Yisrael, Yahweh your Elohim, Yahweh is one, and you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your might. And these words which I'm commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall impress them upon your children, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up, and shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom to everyone worshiping with us at home. It's really a pleasure to have you worshiping with us today, and hope that you're going to enjoy the message. Now, the name of the message today is, Are you nailing Him back on the cross? Now, I know before we get into the study today, I know that there are some people who are going to take issue with the name of this message. There are, because I chose the word cross rather than stake. And that's going to cause an issue for some people. As a matter of fact, there are probably some people who won't even click on the link because they have such strong negative feelings about the use of the word cross in regard to its use as an indication that those things using the term or those people that are using the term are usually ignorant and do not know of its pagan origin and the sun symbol meaning that's associated with it, which is an indication that I do know. All right. And that the Greek word translated cross is stauros. And it actually means stake or pole. Or they must be holding on to old Christian affections for that old rugged cross. Or something like that. So the message must surely be corrupted, and they don't want to waste their time on it. I would like to ask you not to judge too quickly and ask you to bear this cross with me for just a moment, if you will. You see, there are people too who will wonder why I even raised a question about the word cross. There are. Because that's all they've ever heard. They've never heard it called anything else, and they're wondering, well, what's the problem with the word cross? Let me assure you that I have no affection for this Roman device of capital punishment in any configuration, no matter what its design. Its veneration is something that we learned in Christianity. It was used on people before Yahshua and was used on people after Yahshua. And it possesses no special anything any more than the cat with 9 tails, which was used to rip open His flesh and induce such severe bleeding, or any other device of cruelty that they used on Him. That being said, the word cross comes to us by way of the Latin word crux, which means cross. The Romans sometimes crucified, or crucified, if you will, people on a single pole. Though it had no beam or cross member on it, it was still referred to by the Romans as a crux simplex, which means a simple cross. Even though there wasn't actually a cross, it had the same function as the other. What we need to remember is that a pole with an intersecting beam on it is still a pole. And it doesn't matter if the beam is up at the top like a capital T, or if it's a little lower like this, like a lowercase t, it's still a stauros, a stake, a pole. The main structure of a cross is what? The pole, the stauros. Now, we have some of the same terminology in our modern world. How many of you have ever seen a power pole? Okay. It is a stauros. The stauros, a big stake for hanging wire. If it is a simple single-phase service, or just running the wire to your house, it's just attached onto the pole, on the top of the pole or the stauros, and there it sits. But now, how many of us have ever seen power poles with those big wooden cross arms at the top supporting more wire? Sure we have, all right? So, it has a cross member, right? Do we call it a power cross? We don't. We still call it a power pole, right? Even though it's got a cross member. It's the same thing whether it's got a cross member or not, all right? It's the same thing for the execution device. Whether it has a cross member or not, it is for hanging someone on a pole for impaling them. Now, as long as you're seeing it for what it is, a torture device, and you're not venerating it and making it out to be a graven object of worship and the like, there's no real sin in calling it a cross. Right? I usually refer to it as a stake myself, especially when we're talking in these groups here. I refer to it as a stake, but there are a lot of people who don't know what else to call it. But I don't venerate it, whatever I call it. All right? And I want them to be able to hear this message. Okay? I want them to be able to hear this message. There's an old proverb that says, a wise man pointed at the moon, but the fool looked at his finger. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that I'm the wise man in this proverb, all right, by any stretch, all right? But let's don't get caught looking at the finger either. Amen? All right. Because what we're going to be looking today at is something weightier than that. Today, I want to talk about Colossians chapter 2 just a bit. But more specifically, I want to give you something to consider when people try to tell you that the law was nailed to the cross. See why we needed to go there? All right? They support this doctrine based on Colossians chapter 2, particularly verse 14. All right? And this is another example of what I call a Christian one-liner. Whereupon further examination, it really shows shows how that Yahshua is turning us back to the Torah rather than away from it. But before we go there, I want to look at some other passages to help us with our understanding. Okay, let's look at John chapter 1. John chapter 1, I'm going to be reading from the 1998 ISR, Institute for Scripture Research version, and we're going to be on page 1017. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim. He was in the beginning with Elohim. All came to be through Him, and without Him, not even one came to be that came to be. In Him was the life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from Elohim whose name was Yochanan. This one came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but that he might bear witness of the light. He, the other person referenced here, was the true light, which enlightens every man coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came to be through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, To them he gave the authority to become children of Elohim, to those believing in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the desire of flesh, nor of the desire of man, but of Elohim. And the Word became flesh and pitched his tent among us, and we saw his esteem as of an only brought forth of a Father, complete in favor and truth. Okay, so we see that Yahshua was the Word, and the Word became flesh. All right? The word translated word here is the Greek word logos. In the Aramaic, it is the word milta. In both languages, it carries the meaning of the word word, as in a thing spoken. Right? But it can also mean several other things. It can mean a concept or an idea, reason, thinking, meditating, prophecy, and much more. It can also mean things said in the commands of Elohim. All right? Actually, that's why Andrew Roth didn't even try to translate, but rather kept the word milta in his Aramaic translation of the New Testament, rather than trying to define it narrowly. All right? I guess we will mostly just say word, while we're remembering it can mean many things. But the Word became flesh. Look with me for a moment in Hebrews 13. We're going to read just a little bit here. Hebrews 13, page 1172. Is everybody there? Let's look at verse 7. Remember those leading you who spoke the what? Word of Elohim. All right, to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their belief. Verse 8. Yahshua Messiah is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Was this written after the death, burial, and resurrection of Yahshua Messiah? Yes, it was. So according to this, He's the same now as He was before and will always be. Amen? All right, verse 9. Do not be borne about by various and, what are those next two words? Strange teachings. For it is not good for the heart to be established by a favor, not with foods which have not profited those who have been occupied with them. So let me ask you this. Since the writer just got through saying that Yahshua was the same yesterday, today, and forever, do you think, just maybe, that the writer of Hebrews would regard it as a strange teaching to teach that Yahshua is not the same yesterday, today, and forever? Yeah, I feel pretty safe in presuming that. Do not be borne about by various and strange teachings. So, would it then be logical to conclude that the Word of Elohim made flesh would have been the same Word during His ministry, during His execution, while He was in the tomb, and after His resurrection? Yeah. And He would still be the same Word of Elohim after ascending to the right hand of the Father, and He will be the same Word of Elohim forever. All right? That would be logical to conclude, right? Okay. So it's highly unlikely that the Word of Elohim made flesh, which is the same yesterday, today, and forever, changed the Word of Elohim, right? All right. Before we turn to Colossians, I want to quickly look at two passages. One of them we're very familiar with. We're very familiar with both of them, actually. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to read from the Sermon on the Mount. Many of us most likely have this memorized. We're going to be at the bottom of page 920. Matthew 5:17, and Yahshua says, do not think that I came to destroy the Torah or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to complete. For truly I say to you, till the heaven and the earth pass away, the 10 Commandments shall by no means pass from the Torah till all be done. Is that what yours says? Yours doesn't say that, Rosalie? Mine doesn't. Mine doesn't either. For truly I say to you, well, some people want to make it like that. But truly I say to you, till the heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle shall by no means pass from the Torah till all be done. Whoever then breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches men so shall be called least in the reign of the heavens. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the reign of the heavens. For I say to you that unless your what? Righteousness. Do you think that could possibly have something to do with the Torah and the prophets? Maybe, just maybe, okay. Exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees. They were pretty pious though, weren't they? Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall by no means enter into the reign of the heavens. So you have by no means pass from the Torah and by no means enter. And that's two by no means. And that means it ain't going to happen. All right. Now the next one I want you to look at is Matthew 23. So let's turn to Matthew 23. Because we're going to be on page 944. Because Yahshua's got something else to say about the Pharisees here. We're not going to read all of it, but we are going to be reading part of it, and I want you to remember what Yahshua said about the perpetuity, the everlastingness, if you will, of the Torah, and he condemns the scribes and the Pharisees. Right? And this is one place where it becomes very clear what Yahshua thought about the Jewish rulers of the day. And this was the Judaism which Paul was trained in before he rejected it in order to follow Yahshua. And don't forget, they were contemporaries. Okay? Same culture and everything. All right? Matthew 23 and verse 1. And then Yahshua spoke to the crowds and to his taught ones, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moshe. Therefore, what they say to you to guard and do. That's pretty clear, isn't it? Look what else is pretty clear. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. That's pretty clear too, isn't it? All right. For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but with their finger they do not wish to move them. You know, I wonder if the cross or the stake which Yahshua bore on his shoulders, which was put on there by them, which he was bound at the urging of the leaders of the Sanhedrin, was a climactic illustration of what he's describing here in these dealings with other men. Don't know. Verse 4. For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but with their finger they do not wish to move them, and they do all their works to be seen by men, and they make their tefillin wide and lengthen the tzitzit of their garments, and they love the best place at feasts and the best seats in the congregations, and the greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Messiah, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in the heavens. Neither be called leaders, for one is your leader, the Messiah. But the greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. Now, we know that these fellows love to exalt themselves and be exalted by others. All right. We also know that Yahshua condemned them for their traditions which nullify the commands of Elohim. All right. How they honor Elohim with their lips, but their hearts are far from Him. Now, you can read about that in Matthew 15 to have a real good example of that, among other places as well. Though, and as well as through the rest of the chapter 23 that we just read. All right, but this is important as we look at Colossians chapter 2. So let's turn there now. Colossians chapter 2. Page 1143. And Paul, all right, so Colossians chapter 2, verse 1, Paul writes, I wish you to know what a great struggle I have for you and those in Laodicea, and for as many as have not seen my face in the flesh, in order that their hearts might be encouraged, being knit together in love, and to all riches of the entire confirmation of understanding, to a true knowledge of the secret of Elohim and of the Father and of the Messiah, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And this I say, so that no one deceives you with enticing words. Remember what it said in Hebrews 13? It used the words, do not be borne about by various and strange teachings. Okay? Verse 5. For though I'm absent in the flesh, yet I am with you in spirit, rejoicing to see your good order and the steadfastness of your belief in Messiah. Therefore, as you accepted Messiah, Yahshua the Master, walk in Him. That doesn't mean to just think about Him sometimes. All right? It means to follow His example. Walk in Him. Having, verse 7, been rooted and built up in Him. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? And establish the belief as you were taught, overflowing with thanksgiving. See to it that no one makes a prey of you. That's the second warning you got just in just a very few verses here for the same thing. See that no one makes a prey of you. See that no one makes a prey of you an empty deceit. Through philosophy and empty deceit, according to what? The tradition of men. The tradition of men. The tradition of men. According to the elementary matters of the world, and not according to Messiah. Because in Him dwells all the completeness of the mightiness bodily. It's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And also said to do what comes from the seed of Moshe, right? Moses. 10. And you've been made complete in Him, who is the head of all principality and authority. In Him you were also circumcised with a circumcision not made with hands, in the putting off of the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Messiah, having been buried with Him in immersion, in which you also were raised with Him through the belief in the working of Elohim, who raised Him from the dead. And you being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, He has made alive together with Him, having forgiven you all trespasses. Having blotted out, this is verse 14, having blotted out the certificate of debt against us by the dogmas which stood against us, and He has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the stake. Having stripped the principalities and the authorities, He made a public display of them, having prevailed over them in it. Okay, first of all, I presume that you know what authority means. Do you know what a principality is? That one's a little harder. Definition 1 and 2 I got here is a territory ruled by a prince. A territory ruled by a prince or a princess, or from which such a title is derived. Number 2, the position, authority, or jurisdiction of a prince or princess. Sovereignty. Okay? The Hebrew word for prince is nasi. Now, I'm going to read something to you from the Goldworm, Hirsch, and Holder Meir History of the Jewish People. The Second Temple era. And check this out. During the Second Commonwealth, circa 530 BCE through 70 CE, the Nasi, Hebrew word for prince, that's what they put in here. The Nasi was the highest ranking member and president of the Sanhedrin, or assembly. Let that sink in for just a moment. Including when it sat as a criminal court. The position was created in circa 191 BCE when the Sanhedrin lost confidence in the ability of the high priest to serve as its head. It is said that Romans recognized the Nasi as patriarch of the Jews, or father of the Jews, and required all Jews to pay him a tax for the upkeep of that office, which ranked highly in the Roman official hierarchy. These guys who rejected Yeshua and condemned him so soundly with all their traditions, which nullify the commands of Elohim, who sit in the authority of the Yehudim and were operating within the permission of the Roman Empire, who orchestrated Yeshua's public torture and execution to make a public example of him. These guys were a principality. It's pretty amazing, isn't it, what Paul's talking about here? The leader of the Sanhedrin was called the Nasi, the prince. The Sanhedrin was the principality of the Yehudim in Paul and Yeshua's day. All right, so let's read it again. Chapter 2, verse 14 of Colossians. Having blotted out the certificate of debt against us by the dogmas which stood against us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the stake, having stripped the principalities and the authorities, he made a public display of them, having prevailed over them in it. Does that not add a little understanding to what Paul just may be talking about here? What else would the word of Elohim do to those hypocrites? All right. Now, next, does verse 14 say anything about the Torah? No, it doesn't. This is how it reads in the KJV. Verse 14, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross, and having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. Does that say anything about the Torah? Say anything about law of Elohim? No. It says handwriting of ordinances that was against us. The ISR has preserved the Greek word in the English dogma. All right. Now this word's used 5 times in the New Testament writings. And you will see when you go through these that in every case, they were rules and decrees that were made by men. It's not talking about thus saith Yahweh. And for instance, you don't have to turn here because I'm just going to go the single verses real quick, but you can write this down if you're keeping up with it. Luke chapter 2, verse 1. And it came to be in those days that a decree, dogma, went out from Caesar Augustus for all the world to be registered. Acts 16:4. And they went through the cities. And as they went through the cities, they delivered to them the regulations, or dogma, to keep, which were decided by the emissaries and the elders of at Jerusalem. Now, these are the apostles who are indeed making these, but it's talking about their regulations, not the Torah. All right. Acts 17:7. Whom Jason has received, and all of them are acting contrary to the dogmas of Caesar, saying, there is another sovereign, Yeshua. And then Ephesians 2:15, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, the Torah of the commands and dogma, so as to create in himself one renewed man from the two, thus making peace, which is the same thing that's being talked about in Colossians chapter 2. All right. In the Septuagint, it's used once in the book of Ezra and once in the book of Ezekiel and 12 times in the book of Daniel. In the whole Tanakh. All right. Every time it's referring to a man-made decree, etc., usually from a king. All right. So now let's go back to Colossians chapter 2:14 and look at that again. And it says, having blotted out the certificate of debt against us by the dogmas which stood against us. And He has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the stake. Now, do not lose your place at 2 Colossians. Turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 6. We are going to be on page 192. Deuteronomy 6 and verse 24. And Yahweh commanded us to do all these laws to fear Yahweh our Elohim. And what are these next 4 words? For our good always. To keep us alive as it is today. And it is righteousness. And didn't Yahshua say something about our righteousness exceeding somebody else's? And it is righteousness for us when we go to do all this command before Yahweh our Elohim as He has commanded us. For our good always. Let me ask you this. Does for our good always sound like something that is against us? Doesn't to me either. Sounds like for our good, doesn't it? All right, Deuteronomy 10. Over just a couple of pages, going to start reading verse 12. And now, Yisrael, what is Yahweh your Elohim asking of you? But to fear Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in all His ways, and to love Him, and to serve Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, to guard the commands of Yahweh and His laws which I command you today for your good. Does that sound like something which is against us? No. Psalm 19. We are going to be on page 655. Psalm 19, we're going to start reading in verse 7. The Torah of Yahweh is perfect. It's what? Perfect. Bringing back the being. The witness of Yahweh is trustworthy, making wise the simple. The orders of Yahweh are straight, rejoicing the heart. The command of Yahweh is clear, enlightening the eyes. The fear of Yahweh is clean, standing forever. The right rulings of Yahweh are true. They are righteous altogether. More desirable than gold, than much fine gold, and sweeter than honey and the honeycomb. Also, your servant is warned by them. In guarding them, there is great reward. If the Torah of Yahweh is perfect, and it includes the penalties and the curses, would that not mean that it would be imperfect without them? Was it only the blessings that were for our good always, or was punishment for transgression for our good too? Proverbs 3. But what we just read in Psalm 19, that doesn't sound like something that's against us, does it? Sounds like something that was more desirable than gold. Or much fine gold. Proverbs chapter 3. We're going to start reading in verse 11 on page 730. My son, do not despise the discipline of Yahweh, and do not loathe His reproof. For whom Yahweh loves, He reproves as a father the son whom He delights in. Okay, so remembering who the main principality was in Yahshua's day, in Paul's day, let's turn back to Colossians chapter 2. We're going to be on page 1143, and we're going to start reading in verse 14. Having blotted out the certificate of debt against us by the dogmas which stood against us, and He has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the stake. Nailed what? The dogmas of the principalities. Having stripped the principalities and the authorities, He made a public display of them, having prevailed over them in it. Let no one therefore judge you in eating or in drinking or in respect of a festival or a new moon or Sabbath, which are a shadow of what is to come, but the body of Messiah. Isn't that interesting? Could these be the things that the authorities were perverting like they did everything else? All right? And he's saying, don't let them judge how you do it, but rather be judged in doing them by the body of Messiah. Now, our Christian friends frequently point to this passage to say, this is saying, don't keep the Sabbaths and the new moons and the festivals, because they are a shadow of things to come. All right? Now, they're forcing their will on the passage. All right? They're forcing their will on this passage here. It does not say, let no one judge you in not keeping a Sabbath, etc. It says, let no one judge you in respect of a festival or a new moon or Sabbath. That means don't be judged by the dogmas set forth from the principalities and authorities just mentioned in the preceding verses with regard to how you keep these things, but rather the body of Messiah. Also, it does not say that they are a shadow of things lost to the past. If you read it that way, it says that they point to things to come and not done away with. I personally wonder if the part about the Sabbath, etc., isn't supposed to be a parenthetical statement, and the judging by others is the shadow of things to come, which is being referenced here, rather than the Sabbath being the shadow, if you read it this way. All right. Because these... Sorry, lost. All right, so in verse 16 it says, let no one therefore judge you in eating or in drinking or in respect of a festival or a new moon or Sabbath, which is a shadow of what is to come, but the body of Messiah. Either way, if Yahshua is the Word made flesh, and He is the same yesterday, today, and forever, He can't have His disciples teaching a different word, because that wouldn't be the same yesterday, today, and forever. You just can't have it both ways. You just can't have it both ways. Verse 18, let no one deprive you of the prize, one who takes delight in false humility and worship of messengers, taking his stand on what he has not seen, puffed up by his fleshly mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom all the body, nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows with the growth of Elohim. If then you died in Messiah from the elementary matters of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle. Folks, those are not Roman regulations he's referring to there. That's talking about someone else's regulations. Why do your taught ones eat with unwashed hands, forsaking the traditions of our elders? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle. For anyone who's not familiar with that, that's the first thing that the Pharisees and the scribes said to Yahshua in Matthew chapter 15. Verse 22. I'll start back. Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which are all to perish with use according to the commands and teachings of men. Note, he said the commands and teachings of men, not the Torah, which was commands of Elohim. These indeed have an appearance of wisdom and self-imposed worship, humiliation, and harsh treatment of the body, of no value at all, only for the satisfaction of the flesh. So why is Paul bringing up the commands and the teachings of men? Because these are the principalities and authorities who have perverted the word of Elohim. We just don't have so much That we don't have that so much in our society where it is pushed on people like it was then. You know, you were under a lot of social pressure at that time to do these things. And that may make it hard for us to relate. Luke chapter 14. Let's see, we're going to start reading in verse 25. So, it's at the very bottom of page 1001. Luke 14:25. And large crowds were going with him, and turning, he said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters and his own life too, he is unable to be my taught one. And whoever does not bear his stake and come after me is unable to be my taught one. Now, he's not talking about literal hatred here. Right? How can we say that? Well, remember, he was countering the charge of those who were complaining about eating with unwashed hands with why do you, because your traditions transgress the commands of Elohim? For Elohim has said that you shall honor your father and your mother. But you say, if I give something to the temple, I don't have to do anything else for my parents. All right? He's also the same person that said the great command was to the second great command was to love your neighbor as yourself. So he's not talking about actually hating yourself here. He's speaking about loving less. Is what he's talking about. Loving less than him. All right. Verse 26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters and his own life too, he is unable to be my taught one. And whoever does not bear his stake and come after me is unable to be my taught one. All right. Now, this is not talking about just having an opinion about who YHWH is. It's talking about action. This is talking about walking a walk, because it says, whoever does not bear his stake and come after me is unable to be my taught one. 1 John 2:6 says we ought to walk even as he walked. All right? So it's not necessarily easy. And you've seen movies where YHWH is carrying that stake at the crucifixion. That would be heavy to carry, I mean. It's an illustration of what he's saying here, but we have to walk a walk. Verse 28, 14:28. For who of you wishing to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid the foundation and is unable to finish it, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was unable to finish. Or, what sovereign going to fight against another sovereign does not sit down first and take counsel whether he is able with 10,000 to meet who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So then, everyone who does not give up all he has is unable to be my taught one. The salt is good, but if the salt becomes tasteless, with what shall it be seasoned? It's not fit for land, nor for manure. They throw it out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. All right? YHWH gave up all for us in order to turn us back to the Torah and away from the commands of men. Right? He showed us just how far we must be willing to go. You don't have to turn here for just one verse. Romans 7:12 says, so that the Torah truly is set apart and the command set apart and righteous and good. But turn with me to Philippians chapter 2. I'm going to start reading in verse 4 on page 1139. Philippians 2, verse 4. Each one should look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. For let this mind be in you, which was also in Messiah Yeshua, who being in the form of Elohim did not regard equality with Elohim a matter to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, and came to be in the likeness of men. And having been found in the fashion of a man, he humbled himself and became what? Obedient. Unto what? Death. Death even of a what? A stake. Well, what was he obeying? It sure wasn't the dogmas of the Pharisees. The Word of Elohim made flesh was obedient to the Word of Elohim. The same yesterday, today, and forever. Verse 9. Elohim therefore has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name, and that at the name of Yeshua every knee should bow, to those in heaven and to those on earth and those under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Yeshua Messiah is Master, to the esteem of Elohim the Father. So that, my beloved, as you always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much rather in my absence, work out your own deliverance with what? Fear and trembling. Sounds like something that we should be concerned about rather than be flippant. Amen? All right? For it is Elohim who is working in you both to desire and to work for His good pleasure. Now, was Yeshua really dead? It's not a trick question. He was really dead, but He was the same guy that came out of the tomb that went into the tomb. Right? All right? The covenant will be no different, because it too is embodied in Yeshua Messiah, and it will be resurrected as well. Jeremiah 31. We're going to start reading in Jeremiah 31, and we're going to start reading in verse 31, page 499. Jeremiah 31:31. See, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall make a new covenant with the house of Yisrael and with the house of Yehudah. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Mitzrayim, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Yahweh. For this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Yisrael after those days, declares Yahweh. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts. Do you realize that He is putting Yeshua there? He is putting Yeshua in your inward parts. And write it on their hearts. And I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall they teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares Yahweh. For I shall forgive their crookedness, and remember their sins no more. Thus said Yahweh, who gives the sun for a light by day, and the laws of the moon and the stars for a light by night, who stirs up the sea and its waves roar. Yahweh of hosts is His name. And if these laws vanish from before me, declares Yahweh, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation before me. Thus said Yahweh, if the heavens above could be measured and the foundation of the earth searched out beneath, I would also cast off all the seed of Israel for all they have done, declares Yahweh. He's going to put the same law, the same Torah, the same instruction in there. It's His law. Right? The same yesterday, today, and forever. But I will tell you this. As we read, the Torah of Yahweh is perfect. Amen? If you are on one hand saying that Yeshua, the Word of Elohim made flesh, is the same yesterday, today, and forever, while trying to say that the law of sin and death, or the curse of the law, or some other part of the law that you don't like, was nailed to the cross, or whatever it was, remember, this was embodied in Yeshua as well. And you can't have it both ways. It was unrighteous dogma that was nailed up there. He was the Word made flesh. And if it's part of Yahweh's Word that you're referring to, then you are no different than the Romans and the Pharisees, and you're nailing Him back on the cross. Yevrekeka Yahweh ba'ishmareka ya'er Yahweh panavaleka v'kuneka yasa Yahweh panavaleka v'yasem laka shalom. Yahweh bless you and guard you. Yahweh make His face to shine upon you and show favor to you. Yahweh lift up His face upon you and give you His complete contentment.
Hey, hey, and He can make a way. Hey, hey, so humble yourselves and pray and guard His Torah. Obey each day, hallelujah.